on my watch. I think that clock behind us is a little bit fast, so we'll go by my watch. Welcome to this public inquiry. My name is David Wheelier. I'm a reporter within the Scottish Government's Directorate for Planning and Environmental Appeals. I've been appointed by Scottish ministers to conduct this public inquiry and to report to them with my recommendation as to whether consent and deemed planning permission should be granted. The inquiry concerns the proposed Paul's Hill 2 wind farm and will sit for the remainder of this week and will also reconvene for 2 days in November to consider noise issues. Today, tomorrow and Thursday we'll be considering landscape and visual effects of the proposal, and then on Friday morning there'll be a hearing session to discuss policy and socio-economic issues. And then in the afternoon we'll be talking about what conditions should be imposed upon the consent in the event that ministers were minded to allow it. I would say in respect of conditions we will almost certainly avoid talking about noise, given that the noise session is to come later in November, and the noise experts are obviously not here this week. Quick few matters on housekeeping. Obviously it's no smoking in the building. Please make sure your phones are switched to silent. We're not expecting any fire drills. There are 2 fire exits, one the way you came in, and there's also behind this curtain and to the left. You can get out that way. Generally, we will start 10 o'clock each day, as we did today, and we'll expect to sit until about 5 o'clock. Depends how the evidence is going. We don't really want to cut somebody off midstream, but generally around about 5. We are fortunate enough to be able to keep things in the venue overnight. The housekeeper will come back and shut things up and lock it up. I'd recommend not leaving anything valuable, obviously, but certainly all the paperwork can stay. The tables can stay where they are. They don't need the venue at all for any night this week, which is helpful. There's an attendance sheet circulating, a slightly homemade version, which I did this morning, having forgotten to print some out. Given that we will be webcasting procedures, which means there's a camera at the back, and the intention is to upload it to our website so that people who aren't able to be here can view it at their leisure. Given that fact, it's not too critical if parties at the main tables sign the attendance sheet, given that their attendance will be noted on the record. But if anyone sitting in the audience could just sign the sheet, it just ensures that you're kept up to date with what happens and are notified of a decision when it's eventually made. I think that's pretty much it on housekeeping. Oh, one final point. If you do use the kitchen, which is behind me and through that way, if we can make sure we keep it in a clean and tidy state, as I promised the lady we would, that would be much appreciated. I'll now ask those who are sitting around the tables to introduce themselves. I'm aware, as is usually the case, there's been all sorts of exchanges and new documents flying around which you may wish to talk about or tell me about, but if you can hold on to that just for a second, we'll just do the introductions for now, and then you'll have plenty of time if you want to raise any questions or points before we kick off. But just for now, if we can just do introductions, if I can turn first to ask, I should also tell you, sorry, the eternal question of how the microphones work, with which only I seem to have a problem, but you push to talk, the light comes on, and then you push it again when you've finished. If we stick to that, what it means is the camera will auto-focus onto the right person, and it will pick up your sound. If you don't, while we in the room might be able to hear you, it's likely that or possibly those at the back won't, and also the camera won't be able to pick you up. So if you remember to press to talk, the light comes on, and then press when you've finished. Right, having finally remembered that, I'll pass over to ask who appears today for the applicant.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. My name is Marcus Trinick. I'm a solicitor of Queen's Counsel. I'm instructed by Nicola Martin of Wright Johnson Mackenzie, who sits to my left. And for the purposes of this session, I'll be calling Mr. Denny, who also sits to my left. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trinick. And for the Council?
I'm Aileen Scott, Legal Services Manager at the Council, and I have with me Carol Anderson, who is my landscape witness, and Neil McPherson, the planning officer who dealt with the application, but the evidence will be led by Carol Anderson.
Now, we have a number of parties who are opponents to the scheme. Can I first ask who is presenting the case for the immediate neighbours to the site, the Bonzios?
So good morning. I'm John Campbell. I'm a Queen's Counsel at the Scottish Bar, and I am representing Fiona and Jared Bonzio of Corglass.
And we'll do first the other immediate neighbour to the site. Let's ask you to introduce yourself.
My name is Yvonne Mandel. I'm the resident at Glenarder and Glenarder Holiday Cottage. I'm representing myself today.
And representing any other interested parties?
Good morning, sir. I am Ian Kelly, consultant with Graham and Sibbald, and I represent Save Wild Laurie, a group of local objectors.
Thank you very much. I'll explain very briefly how the session will work. As I said before, I go on to give the opportunity for anyone to ask questions or raise any matters. This is an inquiry session, which means the evidence is given by the witness who will be sitting at this table, and it may be that we wish to switch the table over to the other side. That would be the convention. I'm not too bothered either way, but generally you would sit opposite the side that you're representing, if you like. So the witness table is set on this side to deal with the witness for the applicant, but we may wish to move it subsequently when we get onto other witnesses. But the procedure is the witness will sit there, and they will probably best, if they are representing themselves, certainly, perhaps best simply to read out their evidence or a shortened summary if they wish, just to set their case in context. In the case of a witness who has someone representing them, it's perhaps not essential, and I'll leave that up to the parties as to which way they wish to do it. They will then be subject to cross-examination by parties of the other view, the other side of the room, if you like. I may also have some questions of my own, and then there'll be the opportunity for what's called re-examination. So if their own representative wishes to clarify any points or cover any matters that were raised, then they will have the opportunity to come back. And the order in which the evidence is generally heard is the applicant will go first, and generally they could then, once their case is concluded, we would move on to the council's witness, and then it will be anyone else who is in opposition. I was proposing to hear from the Bonzios following the council, and then from Mrs. Mandel after that. Again, if you wish to rearrange that, that's not a problem for me, depending on timing. I appreciate you may not be able to be here all the time, but that's what I was thinking anyway. Yeah, as I say, we have 3 days to get through the evidence. Hopefully that should be plenty of time. We may, if we feel we're running terribly late, have to start slightly earlier or finish slightly later, but, hopefully we won't come to that. Before I hand over to Mr. Trinick to present the applicant's case, I said I would offer the opportunity for any questions, comments, etc. Maybe start with Mr. Trinick. Anything you wanted to raise?
Thank you, sir. Yes, some documents which are going to now be circulated to you. They've already been consulted upon with the other parties who are content that they come in. And I will explain them. I've taken the liberty of numbering them as well, using the APP series. APP 7 you requested, which is a response by the applicant to the consultation responses to the additional information. Secondly, APP 8, this is an extract, or rather a print, from the SNH website on landscape capacity studies, and I'll be putting that document to Carol Anderson. Thirdly, it's not new, but 64A, figure 64A, which is APP 9, is a zoomed-in landscape character assessment, landscape character rather, ZTV overlay. The one in the ES was too small, I couldn't read it. So. APP 10, 11 rather, no 10 first, is the Leakins wireframes, incorrect. These are replacements. That will be explained with apologies. Appendix 11, APP 11 rather, there's a link within Mrs. Mandel's document CD 12.8 number 14. A link is provided. This is that link printed. That will be explained. Then we have a figure from CD 1.8, as figures 13.4, which I've simply taken out because I got fed up with lugging around the whole volume, and I'm going to refer to it so you have it more easily. Figure 13.4, which is in CD 1.8 here. And finally, we at least on this side, only had A4 versions of CD 4.4 maps 1 to 4. Those are larger versions. Those are the documents. We have Wi-Fi in the room, and I'll let Mr. Potter tell you the password for Edenville guest. Edenville CC, lowercase, is the password. Thank you. The latest version of the CD list, I'm told, is version 27 of the 14th of August. If we don't have that, we have a copy. Finally, on timetable, it might help if you receive some estimates of time. I'll be 40 minutes or so with Mr. Denny in chief. I anticipate 3 hours examination of Carol Anderson, 15-20 minutes from Mr. Bonzio, and 15-20 minutes Mrs. Mandel. I don't know if Mr. Kelly's giving evidence in this section. The 15 or 20 minutes for the Mr. Bonzio and Mrs. Mandel, please don't think that's taking your evidence lightly. Just that when it comes to exchanges of opinion, there's a limited amount we can gain by cross-examination. That's it, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trinick, and my apologies to Mr. Potter. I totally forgot to announce the, as I promised I would, the Wi-Fi password. That totally slipped my mind. My apologies. Can I turn to the council? Was there anything you wanted to raise or question?
Just to say that, if at all possible, Carol Anderson needs to be away by lunchtime tomorrow. I'm thinking in terms of the timing that will be achievable, and that would be very helpful if that was possible. In terms of timing, I would anticipate that my cross-examination of Mr. Denny would be between half an hour and an hour, and again, not in terms of not disputing the evidence, but ultimately feel there's 2 expert witnesses before you, and it's for you to determine the position.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell. Okay, Mr. Campbell, do you want to circulate those around? Mr. Trinick, do you think Mr. Denny needs a bit of time to digest Mr. Bonzio's comments before you put him on?
Yes. Well, I need time to digest the comments. I was not able to interrogate them very satisfactorily electronically. They arrived on Sunday and I was travelling. It's not a complaint. It's what it is. No, don't worry about that. No, this is not a big issue. We can deal with them, so do get them round. But if Mr. Denny is going to give evidence immediately, I will not be able to put any comments that he might want to comment upon to him. So either, which is my preference, I recall him briefly, and we just get on with it now, because he may say there's nothing to say. Or you give me half an hour now, which I think is unsatisfactory. It just interrupts proceedings unnecessarily.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd rather we just cracked on, and then if there is anything that, once he's had a proper chance, or you both had a chance to properly look at it, if you want to bring him back, you might not, but if you do, that'll be fine. Yeah. Ms. Mandel, did you have any queries or any questions at this stage?
No.
Mr. Kelly, I think I'm right in thinking, I hope I'm right in thinking, as I didn't mention you earlier, that you're not intending to take part, you're merely observing today, is that right?
Yes, sir. Confirm that Save Weld Maury is not leading a professional expert witness in this session. However, they will be observing proceedings. I had indicated in my hearing statement and in correspondence that there was 2 questions I wanted to put to Mr. Denny, but they're actually about assessment techniques and for visualizations, and it's not something I would expect you to make a ruling on, so therefore on reflection I will not be asking those questions, and therefore we will simply be observing during this evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Okay, Mr. Trinick, I think that was everyone. If hand over to you, thank you.
Thanks, sir. My only witness in this session is Mr. Denny. You should have his inquiry report and his precognition. It might also be useful to have in front of you the inquiry report of Carol Anderson and those of Mr. Bonzio and Mrs. Mandel. Might also be useful to have in front of you at least to hand, the CD16 figures for the ES and the AI figures as well. That's the landscape figures, obviously, not transport or something, landscape figures. I shall be using throughout the inquiry, unless compelled to do otherwise, the AI figures. That'll be my preference. So, Mr. Denny, you go to your precognition, please. What I'm going to do is to ask you to read it to the inquiry. There will then be some supplementary questions. You tell us your name in paragraph 1. If we go to, I think, I'm not going to, but go to appendix 1 to your inquiry report, you tell us about your qualifications and experience.
Yes, that's correct.
Would you read, please, from paragraph 3 of your precognition to the end?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian John Denny. I am a chartered landscape architect, a fellow of the Landscape Institute, and a member of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. This precognition summarises my position on the landscape and visual matters relevant to the proposed Paul's Hill 2 wind farm and addresses any matters raised in the inquiry report of Murray Council and statements of Mr. and Mrs. Bonzio and Mrs. Mandel. It should be read in conjunction with my inquiry report, CD 11.2, and the landscape and visual assessment set out in the ES, which is CD 1.5, and the additional information, CD 110. Since my appointment to provide expert witness services, I visited the site and surrounding area on numerous occasions to inform my understanding of the landscape and visual matters relating to the development proposals. I have considered the properties where residents are likely to experience visual effects, either by visiting the properties or from the closest publicly accessible location. And I've also visited the viewpoint locations, identified the core paths and other locations in the wider landscape, and travelled the road network in the vicinity of the site. I then turn on to Roy's Hill as a landmark hill. The functions of Roy's Hill as a landmark hill, as described within the Murray Wind Energy Landscape Capacity Study, are its prominence in views from the Spey Valley and the visual containment it provides to the existing Paul's Hill 1 wind farm and the availability of extensive views from the summit to the Cairngorms. From my own visits to the area, I concur with the LVIA in that the extent of views to Roy's Hill are limited to locations in close proximity to it, and that in the majority of available views, even as close to Roy's Hill as Toe Moor, it does not display any particular degree of prominence that distinguishes it from other hills also seen in the views. Whence Roy's Hill is seen in the wider landscape, the prominence it has from very localised views close to the foot of the hill is not evident. When seen from the greater part of the A95 travelling east or west, the hill is seen as a comparatively indistinct part of an undulating series of high points along a massif, including Carn na Eig, Gael Chan and Carn, and I can't pronounce it correctly, but I'll do my best, Furain Mer, and becomes blended with the wider upland landscape. In this regard, I consider Roy's Hill to be significantly less of a landmark and less prominent than other landmark hills in Murray, such as Ben Rins. Roy's Hill does provide some visual containment to the existing Roy's Hill wind farm, but does not screen the wind farm from view, as is particularly demonstrated with the visualisations for viewpoint 1, where up to 24 of the existing turbines are shown to appear above the horizon. The degree to which the turbines, sited close to the hill, would detract from its focus is a matter of perception and judgment, and not a certainty as stated in the MWETs. It is dependent on the location of the viewer and particular relationship between the turbines and the hill, which should be judged on their merits and not by the prescriptive application of guidance. I then turn to the objection 1 of Murray Council. Murray Council's first reason for objection suggests that Roy's Hill as a landmark appears distinct as perceived from the surrounding locations. As I've described above, it forms one of a series of hills becoming blended with and largely indistinct from the wider rolling upland landscape. It is accepted that the turbines would be seen alongside Roy's Hill from a number of locations within the landscape, but it is not accepted that these would result in effects of the nature that would warrant the objections set out. The extent to which the proposed development diminishes the scale or function of Roy's Hill should not be considered as being of material concern, a conclusion reinforced by the reporting of a single significant visual effect within the visual impact assessment of the LVIA. Notwithstanding that it is not considered that Roy's Hill represents the kind of landmark hill which is of the most importance in the local landscape, the ability to appreciate the distinctiveness that the hill does exhibit would nonetheless be retained. Furthermore, the location of the turbines is such that Roy's Hill would, alongside the wider adjoining range of hills, such as Ladies Hill and Galchan, still serve to provide a buffer to particularly screen visibility of the turbines from the wider landscape. The elevation and positions of the proposed turbines relate to those of the existing operational wind farm and respect their relationship with the higher landform of Roy's Hill. In particular, the landscape of the Spey Valley to the east and south would, by virtue of this landform, have many sections where the turbines were not visible at all. Where the turbines are visible in this landscape, they would be seen to relate clearly to the neighbouring rolling upland and will be well separated such they would not be dominant features in the landscape. I then turn to objection 2. It is accepted there will be some localised significant character effects, as is typical of any commercial scale wind energy development, but it is not accepted that these would result in effects on the Spey Valley or Upper Knockando area of a nature that would warrant the objections set out by the Council. The turbines would be clearly seen as part of a separate rolling upland landscape beyond the Spey Valley and would not be a dominant feature. The overall defining characteristics of the Spey Valley landscape, including the Upper Knockando area, would be retained. I then turn to objection 3. It is not accepted that the relationship between the proposal and the existing Paul's Hill development would be such as to warrant the objections set out. The proposed turbines have been designed to relate well to the existing Paul's Hill turbines, and that whilst taller, are not of such a difference in height that the two schemes would appear to be poorly related alongside one another in the landscape. It is accepted that there will be some localised significant visual character effects associated with Paul's Hill 2 turbines, but it is not accepted that these will result in effects of the nature that would warrant the objections set out. Neither proposed turbine 1, nor indeed any of the proposed turbines, would have a detrimental impact on the visual amenity of any property, such that they would become an unattractive place to live, in the sense that this is commonly applied to wind farms. Furthermore, it is not considered that the effects of the proposal on the Alt Arda Valley would be imposing, nor would the turbines dominate the character or appearance of the valley to any notable degree. Notwithstanding this, should the reporter believe that the deletion of turbine 1 from the scheme would be necessary to render the scheme acceptable, the concerns raised by the Council in their reason 4 would be further diminished. I have reviewed the inquiry reports of Murray Council, Mr Bonzio, Mrs Mandel, and the hearing statements of Save Wild Murray. I provide my consideration of matters raised within each below, and I also address any additional matters which have been raised which have not earlier been discussed within my inquiry report. I'll start with the inquiry report of Carol Anderson. I do not think that the report of Carol Anderson raises any new matters that have not already been raised by Murray Council Committee Report, CD 2.6, or dealt with within the environmental information or in my inquiry report. I note, however, that as stated at paragraph 5.1 in relation to the landscape and visual effects of the proposal, this is principally an issue of detailed siting and design, and the Council does not dispute that the landscape of the open rolling uplands could accommodate further wind development. I also note that S&H state that the effects are likely to be relatively limited in extent, and the Council considers that the visual effects of this proposal would not be widespread. I then turn to the inquiry statement of Mr and Mrs Bonzio. Mr Bonzio's inquiry statement deals with a number of potential effects on Paul's Hill 2 wind farm, primarily the likely effects on core glass on both a solus and cumulative basis, and also on the local landscape within which Mr Bonzio conducts his business. Mr Bonzio makes a number of assertions relating to the LVIA and additional information in terms of quality and fitness for purpose. I do not agree with these assertions and consider that the submitted environmental information is fit for purpose and has been carried out in accordance with best practice guidance and to a methodology and approach appropriate to the assessment of wind farm proposals. I accept that there will be differences of opinion in relation to the findings of an assessment or in relation to matters of judgment within an assessment, as there has been between the appellant and council, but these differences do not undermine the assessment in the manner suggested by Mr Bonzio. The Council has considered the LVIA submitted with the environmental statement and set out in their committee report at Appendix 1, and I quote, "The landscape and visual impact assessment, including its methodology and visualisation, generally accords with current best practice guidance, although the Council has some reservations about the judgments made on sensitivity and the magnitude of change incurred by the proposal." I then turn to the statement of Yvonne Mandel. I've considered the inquiry statement of Mrs Mandel and note the concerns that she has raised concerning the impact the proposed wind farm will have on the residential amenity of Glenarder. The statement of Mrs Mandel clearly sets out her concerns relating to the visual component of residential amenity and the effect that the visual change would have on her own residential amenity and in relation to her holiday-let business. The residential visual amenity study sets out the effects on residential amenity in a manner consistent with accepted best practice in an objective manner appropriate to such assessments. The planning system does not recognise the right to a view or that views enjoyed by residents of a property should not be changed, even in an adverse manner. This may seem stark and unsympathetic when set out in a residential amenity study, but it is the correct and required approach. A significant change to a view or views is not necessarily an unacceptable effect, but the planning system does not seek to protect residential amenity insofar as changes should not lead to unacceptable living conditions. Although I understand the concerns raised by Mrs Mandel, which are familiar to the concerns raised by Mr Bonzio in relation to his property, I do not consider that the changes to views resulting from the proposed wind farm will be overbearing or overwhelming. I also note that many of Mrs Mandel's concerns relate to the potential cumulative effects and may or may not arise from a future series of scenarios. The matters raised are all considered in the submitted environmental information and in my inquiry report.
I'll stop you there and we'll come back to the conclusions later. Would you now take up, please, the inquiry report of Carol Anderson and go to paragraph 5.5. There are 2 points arising from this paragraph. Firstly, the question of receptor sensitivity at viewpoint 7, which people can read the relevant text for themselves. She says you've got the sensitivity too low. to address this, so would you get out also the ES Chapter 6 at page 657? What Carol Anderson says.
Apologies. I'll start again. I consider that the level effect is correct, and the LVI identifies a minor, moderate, and not significant effect. The reason being is that the viewpoint is not one recognised or identified for its particular scenic value in the local or wider context. For example, it doesn't lie within a local landscape designation, for example, although landscape designations designed to represent the quality of the landscape exist nearby. Viewpoint 7 is representative of a short stretch of this minor road. The magnitude is considered to be moderate, and I do not think this is a high sensitivity viewpoint. But even if a medium and not low sensitivity were to be attached to this assessment, it would still, in my opinion, not lead to a significant effect, and that is set out at 3.8 of my inquiry statement. It lies outside the HLV, and the viewpoint is representative of the road and in its wider context.
Thank you. Further on in the same paragraph in Carol Anderson's inquiry report, that's 5.5, she says, there will also be visibility of the proposal from other sections of the B9102 west of Archiestown, etc. To deal with this, you need to get out ES figure, apologies for this, 610B. Would it be helpful, do you have a hard copy of those ES figures?
So for the purposes of this point, which will be very short,
let's
I'm
get
going to offer my copy.
No. 610B.
Sorry, can we just have some clarity as to whether that's in the environmental statement or the
It's
additional information?
Volume 3 of the ES, which is CD 16. Are you okay? That's it. You have it. I'll wait till the councillor ready. I think. And so you might want to make a note of the following page in the ES. I'm not going to ask you to go to it. It's ES chapter 6. It's page 673, 674. So you have that reference when Mr. Denny gives his response in a moment. Okay? Away you go.
I hope what everybody is now looking at is the linear assessment for the B9-102. This gives a linear assessment of the, first of all, the potential visibility of the turbines from the B9-102, and then deals with the actual visibility. It goes from Grantown-on-Spey to the A491 junction in the east. That is near Craigalachy. The turbine visibility along the section of road is restricted significantly to a section from Archestown to Upper Knockando when travelling west. For the greater part of the journey travelling east, there's no visibility of the Paul's Hill 2 turbines at all, and for the greater part of the journey travelling west, there is limited or no visibility. And this is dealt with in the LVAA pages 73 and 74. The theoretical visibility on the linear study that everyone has turned to is for a theoretical 30% visibility along the route. 21% of the route actually has some but limited visibility, and only 7% of the route, and it's that area in the area around Archestown and Upper Knockando, only 7% of the route has any clear visibility of the turbines. So in terms of the impact on that minor road, the B9-102, even the opportunity to see the turbines is limited, and then the effect of those is also relatively limited as well. The most clear view in that 7% section is, of course, viewpoint 7.
Perhaps also viewpoint 6 at Archestown. Yeah, so viewpoint 6 and 7. That deals with the inquiry report of Carol Anderson. Would you pick up that, please, of Mr. Bonzio?
Yes.
And go to his executive summary, which is on page 3 is the one I want. And here he says, in addition, the AI's accompanying text is often subjective in its manner of expression, also based on a reductionist approach throughout. It ultimately reduces the effects of Paul's Hill 2 wind farm individually and cumulatively in cumulative scenarios. What I'd like you to do is to tackle that paragraph, but in doing so, perhaps give some explanation to the inquiry of the approach that is taken to cumulative assessment.
Yes, cumulative assessment is always the tricky issue at inquiries, and it's one of the most difficult both to understand but also to undertake. I understand what Mr. Bonzio is saying and have some sympathy with that. I definitely have some sympathy with his concerns with regard to cumulative assessment. He says it's a reductionist approach. A reductionist approach would be breaking something down into its bits and seeing it from the properties of those bits. It's describing a complex phenomenon by terms of its parts. And to some extent, that is what cumulative assessment does. Now, I fully understand that if I was trying to describe to you what a bird looked like, you would be right to say that by merely describing all of its individual bones, that would be a reductionist approach. But that's not the way that cumulative assessment works. Cumulative assessment can become complicated and difficult to convey and to understand, especially when numerous wind farms are in play and at different stages of the planning process. And that's particularly why I have some sympathy with local people trying to understand the cumulative position. What the cumulative assessment is doing, however, is isolating the various effects as required by guidance and as necessary to inform a decision maker. If the decision maker only had the totality of the effects, then it wouldn't be possible to decide what the merits of Paul's Hill 2 wind farm was. within that context. And the cumulative assessment is designed to provide a series of layers of information that can inform a decision maker, but which particularly and most importantly, by guidance, must assess what the additional effect is of the wind farm which is the subject. However, I have addressed the totality of the effects in the additional information, so that combination of the additional information and all of the cumulative assessment within the LVIA provides all of the information necessary to understand the cumulative effects.
You've read, obviously, the two reports, and you've assessed matters as you should. Can I just rehearse back to you, slightly leading you, but I don't think it matters, how, from perhaps a semi-layman's point of view, my point of view, this might be viewed. When looking at the additional effects of Paul's Hill 2 on any given baseline, you have a series of baselines. One is what's there and maybe under construction. Secondly, what's there and plus what's under construction and consented. And there's a third scenario, which is all that plus what's in planning. Correct so far?
That's correct.
Right. And there you're looking at what Paul's Hill 2 adds to the picture. The second approach, which you also take in the AI, is to say, let's look at it all as if it was there, at the totality of the picture, and what Paul's Hill, sort of, the part it plays in the mix. Is that correct so far?
That's correct.
Fine. Is it required of you, though, to look at the mirror image? In other words, to look at the effects of, in this case, Clashgower or Rothus 3 on a baseline including Paul's Hill 2? And if not, why not?
Well, no, it isn't, and I haven't done so, and it would not be appropriate to do so. It is for Clashgower the cumulative effects of all of the wind farms which it within its base proper and to best guidance for Paul's Hill's cumulative effect.
I think I follow that. In other words, you haven't examined the individual merits of Clashgower and Rothus 3.
No, I haven't, and I couldn't do so. I don't have the knowledge or the information to do so. I know where those schemes may lie in terms of visibility within the parameters of the assessment of Paul's Hill, but they will have effects and cumulative effects and other effects in other areas which Paul's Hill has nothing to do with, and therefore I have no knowledge of those effects, cumulative or otherwise.
Thank you. This takes us to another methodological point, which is responding to the evidence of Mr. Bonzio and Mrs. Mandel, and the topic is the impacts on their properties. And I want you just to explain, in response to their evidence, whether or not there's a difference between determining a significant visual effect for EIA purposes and looking at the effect on their properties. And so how do you go about both exercises? In brief, please.
Yes, in reading the evidence of both Mr. Bonzio and Mrs. Mandel, it may appear that they consider that a significant visual effect also goes directly to the matter of living conditions. And although there may be some interrelationship in terms of the assessment of effect, they are not the same thing. They are two separate tests that are required here, and a significant visual effect is not necessarily an unacceptable effect on living conditions. A second judgment needs to be made by a decision maker or an assessor to assess what the impact may be on living conditions over and above whether a significant effect has been identified. And that is what we refer to as a residential amenity test. I mean, it's not a test that can be passed or failed, it's a matter of judgment. But as commonly used within wind farms, the terminology which is becoming accepted is to decide whether the turbines would have a dominant effect on the living conditions such that it became an undesirable place in which to live. And that is a matter of judgment that is made separate from the identification of a significant visual effect.
Thank you. Now move on to the leak in wireframes. So I lied. You will have to go to more figures. To go to the AI, I think, is the best. The CD18, the AI figures. And within it, it's figure 9C1. When you're there, also then get out from the hard copies handed out this morning, the revised Y lines.
Yeah, I'm there, thank you.
Sorry, sir. You're there. I'll wait till others have got there. Carol, if you go right through the settlement, it's towards the end. It's about that much thickness from the end. Excellent, thank you. Well, Mr. Denny, what do you want to tell us?
Well, so as you may have already seen from my inquiry report, in bringing myself up to speed and checking and reading and rechecking the environmental information in the environmental statement, I had already discovered that what I believe to be the misreporting of a distance from leak-in to the nearest turbine was not 4.3, but was 2.3 kilometres. And I'd set that out. It's paragraph 39, page 14 of my statement. In continuing to check visual material, particularly in relation to the work I was doing in response to Mr. Bonzio's evidence, I did actually discover that it wasn't just that the distance had been written down incorrectly. The reason for the distance being incorrect was that the wrong coordinate had been put in for the property. And the wrong coordinate therefore caused the visualization to be set for 4.3 kilometres, not 2.3. So what I've done is produced or what Actual Power indeed have done, who are producing the visualizations, is produced a revised visualization. Because the property is closer than 4.3 at 2.3, the effect of that is that the landform has obscured a few of the turbines that would have been visible at 4.3, because the landform is now changing the angle of view. So there are less turbines visible. The hubs of the remaining prominent turbines are closer to the ground, so less tower is visible. So in fact there is in some ways an improvement in the visual context, but nonetheless, because it is closer, those turbines which are more prominent, particularly 4, 5 and 1, are clearly larger in the view. I've assessed this and...
Just pause. The assessment said, I'm not sure you need to go to it, but it's on ES page 665. Carry on.
The assessment had already assessed that there was a significant or borderline significant effect in any event, and that would have been moderate significant and in some cases moderate minor, borderline depending on whether you're looking at curtilage and access and various parts that are explained in the LVIA. I consider that the assessment now would become a moderate major effect, and that would remain a significant effect, significant visual effect in the manner expressed within the LVIA, and that although a distance of 2.3 kilometres and the altered degree of visibility, the turbines would not be dominant and not be overwhelming or overbearing. So I don't think the assessed position changes in terms of the level of significance and whether or not it would have an overwhelming or overbearing effect, but there is a difference in what is visible.
Thank you. Just to note, so my first microphone of the day appears to have died. So note that for your colleague. Mr. Bonzio's inquiry report, please, at page 25, paragraph 5611. I love hard copies. So much fun. I don't know. 5611, here Mr. Bonzio was talking about Archestown. The village has several forestry commissions, Scotland, waymark walks, etc. The walks are through partly felled commercial forestry and to Murray Landmark Hunt Hill. Further felling will continue to open views to the north and west of the overall combined cumulative development in operation, etc. I think you just want to comment on the forestry position.
Yes, I do. My view in relation to that is first of all that the vegetation would not be clear felled at any one single time. The felling would be successional and on a rolling basis. And there also would be successional replanting. Having considered it, I think that over the life of the wind farm, this would not give rise to a great deal of difference in the overall visibility or effect in relation to those paths.
Final reference in terms of somebody else's evidence is to page 32 of Mr. Bonzio's inquiry report, paragraph 10.2. Just record that for you, sir. I don't need to go there. Many of the Y lines have not been produced for cumulative consideration. In particular, we note Paul's Hill 2 was always placed in the centre, which has the effect of fragmenting the cumulative visualisation. In other words, Mr. Bonzio is saying, as with, say, We've been to Leekens, that if you have a figure which starts out with Paul's Hill, then you won't get Clashgar on it as well. Whereas I suppose if you centred it on Clashgar, you might possibly have got Rother Street to the right and Paul's Hill to the left, or not, depending on the size of paper. What's your response?
Well, for a start, what you've just said is correct. The reason why Paul's Hill is always placed in the centre of the view is that this is the best practice. This is actually what's required and what we are expected to do. Again, I have sympathy with Mr. Bonzio's approach in which he'd like, for example, Paul's Hill to be in the left of the view, Clashgar in the centre, and Rothes in the right of the view, because Mr. Bonzio has particular concerns about those wind farms in the cumulative scenario. But for best practice cumulative assessment, it's correct for Paul's Hill to be placed in the centre of the view.
Yes, let me put Mr. Bonzio's point of view to a different way. Best practice, I always think, well, best practice is best practice. Why is it best practice? Well, is what you're saying that you are there to assess Paul's Hill and not Clashgar, and that is why you put it in the centre of any given view? That's fine. Carry on with the answer.
I was awaiting you jumping in there, Mr. Campbell. I mean, I think you've already covered the point as to what you are required to do in terms of cumulative assessment, which is to work from the standpoint of Paul's Hill too. And for that, bearing in mind you've already answered that point, I'm quite happy if you'd answer this, which I think you'll be saying the same thing again, but I'll over to you.
Yes, sir. I mean, whether Mr. Campbell considers it a leading question or not, I've done so many cumulative assessments, I'm very, very familiar with cumulative assessment guidance. It is the case that this cumulative assessment should be looking at Paul's Hill, because it is about Paul's Hill, and then it's placing Paul's Hill in an appropriate cumulative context. That is the purpose of the cumulative assessment.
Thanks. I apologise if I led, but when I hear the answer, something is good practice, I always say, why? I want you now to turn to read at the end of your summary, paragraphs 23 and 24. But before that, I just want to make sure the inquiry knows we apologise for the errors in respect of Leakins. There's no excuse for that. Carry on, please.
I now turn to my overall summary. Having reviewed the findings of the LVIA presented in the environmental statement and the environmental information, the additional environmental information, and considered these in terms of the Murray Council Committee report and reasons for objection, and the consultation responses of SNH and other parties, I consider that the scale, grain and nature of this landscape are able to accommodate the turbines without giving rise to visual character effects that would be considered unacceptable. And this is recognised in the Murray Wind Energy Landscape Capacity Study. Indeed, despite the assertions of Murray Council within their reasons for objection, the proposed development would be anticipated to give rise to highly localised significant character, visual or cumulative effects. I come to this conclusion having regard to the relevant policy context relating to landscape and visual matters, taking into account the Murray Wind Energy Landscape Capacity Study, and to issues of knowledge landscape importance, balanced against my understanding of the level and nature of the landscape and visual effects.
Thank you, Mr. Tony. Would you please stay there? There may be some questions for you.
Okay, I'll now hand over to Ms. Scott if you have any questions for this witness.
Thank you. Just the documents that I will be asking you to have a look at are CD15, which is the environmental statement, which I think you've already got there. It's volume 2. Viewpoints within CD16, which is the volume 3 of the environmental statement. CD110, which is the additional information on the cumulative LVIA. CD44, which is the Council's supplementary guidance. CD53, which is the SNH guidance.
Which SNH guidance?
The Siting and Design of Wind Farms version 3, February 2017, CD53. And I'll also be asking you to look at CD13.3, which is the non-technical summary for the original Paul's Hill Wind Farm from 2001. You only became involved in this project in January of this year. So just to be clear, you weren't involved with site selection or design and are effectively providing a retrospective review of the proposal.
No, I was appointed in January 2019. That's correct.
And do you think there's benefits in having somebody new providing a retrospective review, or better to have consistency with somebody seeing the project through from start to finish and can speak to their work throughout the course of the project?
Well, I think there are pros and cons to both of those approaches. I think in particular having a second pair of eyes look at the project can be very helpful. And certainly before I take a commission, the first thing the client asks me to do is to read and review the environmental information and decide whether I can support it or not. There have been occasions where I felt that I haven't been able to support it, and I've then been able to influence sometimes a resubmission. That isn't the case here, but it can be useful to have somebody having another look at it with a fresh pair of eyes.
In your inquiry report in paragraphs 214 and 215, you are describing the process and the design strategy that was adopted by the applicant and the previous consultant, which led them to arrive at the design and the layout. It's not totally clear from what you've said here if you are simply reporting the facts as you found them, or if you agree with the strategy that was adopted by the previous consultant.
Well, I do agree with the strategy. If there was anything which I didn't agree with, I would report it.
So, in going forward, can we assume then, for landscape and visual purposes, you endorse the design and layout of Paul's Hill 2 as is before the inquiry?
Yes, I do.
In paragraph 2.14 on the design evolution and looking at the design process, you highlight within that paragraph that one of the key determining factors was to ensure residential amenity was protected through minimising the impacts on nearby properties. Obviously, there's evidence before the inquiry which shows that various people take a different view on that, but do you think that has been achieved for core glass in particular when you look at turbine 1?
Well, yes, my statement is clear that I think that although there are significant visual effects and a change in the view from those properties, which I fully understand Mr. Bonzio and Mrs. Mandel find personally unacceptable, but within the context of residential visual amenity study, I agree that I don't think that the effects are overwhelming, overbearing, and therefore in that context the scheme has appropriately addressed, as far as it could, those impacts, and clearly took them into consideration. But as you've seen from my inquiry statement, I fully accept that turbine 1 has the greatest potential impact. It's giving rise to the greater part of those effects, hence the statement that I have made in my statement concerning turbine 1.
And looking at turbine 1 in particular, if you look at CD 16, which is volume 3 of the environmental statement, and figure 6.7D, which is the viewpoint from Corglass Farm Holiday Cottage, in particular where it looks at turbine 1 and shows the impact of that, could you explain, in relation to turbine 1 in particular, how you think that that has been located to minimise the impact on that property?
Well, first of all, in wind farm design, minimising visual or other landscape and environmental effects does not mean to make minimal. It certainly doesn't mean to make a turbine not visible, or visible only to some very minor degree. It's perfectly possible and perfectly acceptable for a turbine to be clearly visible from a residential property, and for that change in the view to remain an acceptable change. That is why, as I explained earlier, we have a two-stage process in terms of not only looking at what are the significant effects in terms of the DS requirement for significant effects, but also making those judgments on the impact on living conditions such that the location or the visibility of the turbine is not unacceptably harmful on those living conditions. I believe that to be the case here, notwithstanding the fact that there is a clear view of turbine 1.
And obviously, given the evidence before the inquiry, do you accept that the Council and the Bonzios both reach a different view, particularly in relation to turbine 1?
Do I understand that quite acutely? You asked me at the beginning about whether or not it was worthwhile or useful to have a second pair of eyes or a different landscape architect dealing with the scheme. You can see that through my involvement, one of the issues that has arisen is my understanding of the degree of the effect on residential amenity which comes from turbine 1, and notwithstanding the fact that I consider that still passes the relevant residential amenity test, if we want to call it that, that I have suggested that should the reporter find that he thinks otherwise, then that a condition can be applied to remove that turbine. That is me giving my independent view and bringing that to inquiry.
And in relation to that point, are you aware that throughout the process of determining the application, the Council was advised that this proposal of 7 turbines as one unit was the minimum that was needed to make this viable, and all 7 had to be considered by the Council?
I can't give you any evidence on viability, and it's not something that I can assist you with, I'm afraid.
but are you aware that that was the stance taken by your client?
I haven't had discussions on viability, no.
If I could ask you to look at the SNH guidance, which is CD 5.3.
Siting and designing wind farms in the landscape.
Sorry, paragraph 416. This paragraph says, where an extension to an existing wind farm is proposed, the turbine's use should be compatible with those in the existing wind farm, including aspects of scale and form. In this scenario, looking at Pulse Hill 1 and Pulse Hill 2, would you accept that there's a significant difference in height between the turbines? Pulse Hill 1 is 100 metres, and the majority, in fact 6 out of the 7 in Pulse Hill 2 are up to 150.
In terms of the mathematics of the different heights of the turbines, what you've put to me is correct. What is important is not what is the difference in height between earlier smaller turbines and the new larger turbines that we are now bringing forward into the landscape, but what is the actual visual effect and relationship between them. And as can be seen from the LVIA and the design iteration, all the matters concerning ensuring that as far as is possible when making an extension where the turbines do not exactly mirror the older turbines that were previously deployed, then all the right steps have been taken here to ensure that, that the turbines do work well together and do appear in the landscape as a single coherent wind farm, which I believe is the case.
And again, looking at the two schemes, the exact type of turbine isn't yet known if the scheme is consented. So it's not yet, there's no definitive figures yet on rotor diameter. But again, given the height of the turbines, would you accept there will be a considerable difference between Pulse Hill 1 and Pulse Hill 2 in terms of diameter?
Yes, there will be a difference in rotor diameter. The ones in the visualizations are 117, and within the parameters of the height of the turbines to blade tip could go up to 130. I have examined that, and that is set out in my statement. I've examined what the impact of those two things would be. Again, I think we have to be clear here that we know across the whole of Scotland that in extending wind farms or bringing forward new wind farms, we are not seeking to replicate the smaller turbines of the past. There is a need to accommodate, to meet the needs for renewable energy, the larger, more efficient turbines that are now available in the marketplace. And therefore we're not going to have a situation where old schemes with 80 or 100 metre to tip wind turbines are just going to be extended by the application of those same turbines, probably because they're not even available in the marketplace. So what we who work and design wind farms need to do is to work how to best approach extending existing wind farms, deploying the new, more effective technologies, and still having them look appropriate in the landscape. That's the task we face. The task we face isn't just to say, well, the scheme I want to extend has got 110s on it, so we'll just put some more 110s on it, because that isn't happening and it's not the way it's going to happen. The important thing is, what is the actual effect of the extension when seen in the wider landscape, both in terms of impact on character and impact on views. In this context, as you put to me earlier, the design iteration process, in terms of the choice, location, number of turbines, has sought to ensure that the appropriate relationship exists, and I believe that it does.
And you'll obviously accept that an alternative view has been reached by the Council, which is why we're obviously here on a difference of opinion in relation to that, because I accept that technology has moved on, but ultimately, in terms of the guidance, you still have to design an extension that is compatible and has regard to the design of the original scheme, which in this case I think everybody accepts is a well-contained, well-designed scheme which has operated well for a considerable number of years.
What one has to do is to seek to provide an appropriate extension which sits and works well in the landscape, and in which you have sought to minimise the environmental effects. But as I said earlier, that is not to say to make them minimal, because the way to make the effects of an extension minimal is to have no turbines in the extension. What we're looking here is to get an appropriate relationship between the extension and the existing wind farm. I believe that has been achieved.
In paragraph 213 of your inquiry report, you acknowledge that the new turbines are very likely to rotate at different speeds, and that's an acknowledged issue in terms of the visual impact of that. There doesn't seem to be anywhere where that issue has been clearly addressed within the assessments that you have undertaken. Would you accept that that is an issue which could well give rise to concerns in terms of visual impact?
Well, I think I do say in my inquiry statement that I recognise that there would be a difference in the blade tip speed of the turbines because of the difference in the swept path. That is an inevitability. And I did take that into consideration when I was making my judgments about whether I thought, for example, the transition from 117 to 130 blade length turbines within the parameters of this application would be acceptable. I did take that into account in making those judgments when I was on site.
Again, having regards to the SNH guidance and looking at viewpoint 1 from Tormore Distillery, which is in CD 16, where there's and the guidance from SNH says the design rationale generally should be that the original wind farm development, generally the design rationale of the original wind farm development should not be eroded. When you look at that viewpoint and you see the impact particularly of turbines 6 and 7, can you explain how you feel the scale and form of these new turbines are compatible with the existing turbines within the landscape?
Yes, this is actually a useful viewpoint to show how both Paul's Hill 1 and Paul's Hill 2 turbines all sit and appear to sit beyond the skyline and in the upland landscape. It's clear that some of the turbines, even within Paul's 1, appear smaller in the view than other Paul's 1 turbines, and that gives you the visual reference that those turbines are further away from you. And there are differences in height within Paul's Hill 1 because of the different relationship of those turbines within the layout. The appearance of the larger turbines to the right of the view, which are the Paul's Hill 2 turbines, serves really to give you the impression that those two turbines are closer to you. It doesn't, in my view, mean that they appear to be disaggregated from or completely different from the wind farm as a whole. I still read that as a single wind farm, with some turbines being located further away from me and some being located closer to the viewpoint. And that can happen in any wind farm, even if all of the turbines are of the same height. Particularly, of course, is what also you need to concentrate on is not just whether the height to blade tip of turbines is, say, 110 or 130 or whatever it may be, but of course the topography on the base at which they sit. So even if you had a wind farm where you were extending 110s with 110s, if they sat on higher ground, they would appear to be larger from a given viewpoint. There's complex ways of actually designing and balancing the relationship of turbines within a wind farm, but I don't think there's anything about the Paul's Hill 2 turbines which lead you to believe that they're not an appropriate extension of Paul's Hill 1, and that they don't read in the landscape as part of Paul's Hill 1.
Would you accept that they are considerably larger turbines and, particularly from this viewpoint, are located much higher up in the landscape and do appear quite prominent from that viewpoint?
Well, clearly they are the two most prominent turbines in that view, but they are associated with a view of a wind farm in which all of the turbines are, to a degree, prominent. It isn't as though they are sitting in a different landscape or appearing to be in a different landscape and separate from the wind farm that surrounds them. As I said earlier, the impression one has is that they are the two turbines which are closer to the viewer. It's the perception one would have, but that they are still related completely to the wind farm that surrounds them.
Obviously, from that viewpoint, you're looking at a fairly clear view of Roy's Hill. In paragraph 2.5 of your inquiry report, you describe the landscape there and note, and I'm quoting you here, the broad dome of Roy's Hill forms a feature above the Spey Valley. That seems to contradict the tone of section 4 of your report, where you are quite dismissive of Roy's Hill's function, and I think your view seems to be that it's not really a landmark feature. There does seem to be some discrepancy between those 2 points.
Well, I think there's a big difference between forming a feature or backdrop to a part of the landscape and my understanding of really the way landmark hills function. For me, a landmark hill is a hill which is clearly and easily identifiable within the landscape, particularly within the wider landscape. It's usually of a character, of a shape, of a form which is easily distinguished within the landscape, and from which one can pick out as a navigational aid, as a way marker, as an arrival point from different points within the landscape. I found in learning about this landscape that although Paul's Hill is a hill which one sees from parts of the Spey Valley, and it does form a backdrop to parts of the Spey Valley, that for the majority of my journeys around the landscape, Paul's Hill was not a landmark. It wasn't helping me navigate, it wasn't a way marker. In most cases, it wasn't visible. In many cases where it was visible, it appeared as one of many hills within a massif, and I had difficulty in distinguishing it from the others. In fact, I found myself needing to see the Ballshill 1 turbines from certain locations to realise I was looking at Roy's Hill. But I do acknowledge that in the more local landscape, that Roy's Hill does form a prominent backdrop to parts of the Spey Valley. I think that's very different to my view as the extent to which it fulfills what I consider the proper function of a landmark hill. That doesn't mean to say that I don't accept that it is a high point hill in this local landscape, because clearly it is. And just in relation to that earlier point that you were making to me, the other point that I probably should have made is that even when we're looking at those two turbines you were pointing out to me as being more prominent in the view, they're still prominent in the view, which is a view which already has a wind farm in it, and they're part of that view. So it's not as though they're prominent in a pristine landscape where a wind farm was not a characteristic of the view.
In paragraph 2.7 of your inquiry report, just want to touch on, again, what seems to be an understatement in the description of the landscape, where you mention the existing access track to the Paul's Hill wind farm, and you describe it as being evident. I think it would maybe be fair to say that in visual terms it's a little bit more than evident. It's quite an eyesore, the existing track. Are you aware that the Council Committee report says that if this second development is consented, we would not want to see that access track is expanded in any way, given its already significant impact? Do you understand why the Council would be looking for that in landscape terms?
I can understand why the Council would not want environmental effects to occur which were not necessary. It's my understanding that there is no extension needed for the existing cutting that provides access to Paul's Hill 1. I do accept that from a few locations it's quite evident in the landscape, it's quite a prominent feature in the local landscape, but of course it's been approved and built and was considered acceptable in the past, so it now is part of the baseline of the landscape. But I think actually in terms of its wider impact on the landscape, it isn't prominent or visible from the wider landscape. There are locations which you can find which it is clearly evident as a feature in the landscape, as I expressed in my statement.
If looking at paragraph 4.5 of your inquiry report, coming back to Roy's Hill, you've stated that it doesn't screen the existing Paul's Hill wind farm from view. I think it's generally accepted that it does provide quite a screening effect of Paul's Hill from some views. Would you accept that?
I apologise, I've not had my microphone on. From the viewpoint at Tomore, which you took me to earlier, which is one of the views that the council, through their evidence, is particularly concerned with, that is a viewpoint in which clearly Roy's Hill does not screen Paul's Hill. I mean, a great deal of Paul's Hill 1 is visible in that viewpoint. And indeed, for the majority of all the high points in the landscape, Roy's Hill does not obscure Paul's Hill 1. I mean, for example, from Ben Rins, because many of those high points are higher than Roy's Hill, and therefore Roy's Hill's screening potential is diminished by that. Again, it comes back to this point that it's in the immediate closer landscape in that vicinity of Knockando and the Spey Valley, short section of Spey Valley Road in that location, from which Roy's Hill does provide the screening function that you suggest. But actually, from the majority of the landscape, it doesn't.
So the statement here where it says that Roy's Hill does not screen the wind farm from view, that's a generalisation which isn't totally correct. It clearly plays a function in relation to Paul's Hill 1.
Well, it's completely correct. Roy's Hill does not screen the wind farm from view. I've just identified quite a number of places from which you'll be able to see the wind farm because Roy's Hill does not screen it from view. It's a matter of fact. The fact that there might be a place from which it does is not the same thing as saying, if you say Roy's Hill screens the wind farm from view, that would appear to mean that it screens the wind farm from view in all cases. It's quite the opposite. In the majority of cases, it doesn't.
But there are viewpoints where it does provide a significant screening, for example, from Core Glass, where Paul's Hill 1 is not visible at all because of Roy's Hill.
No, that's not correct. If you're at Core Glass, Roy's Hill is to your west or southwest. It's actually the slopes on which the Paul's Hill 2 turbines are situated above, which, because of the close proximity of Core Glass to those slopes, that obscures Paul's Hill 1. There may be some of the turbines on the northwestern edge of Paul's Hill 1, which the north-facing slopes of Roy's Hill do obscure, but in the main, it's actually just part of the general upland landscape massif, which is screening Paul's Hill 1, rather than Paul's Hill as a landmark hill in its own right.
If I could just refer you to CD 13.3, which I mentioned at the start, which is the original non-technical summary for Paul's Hill 1.
That I don't have. I have that in front of me now.
Page 5 of that document, paragraph NTS 8. That paragraph describes the design iteration that was gone through for the original Paul's Hill wind farm, and it says that the position and the design of the original wind farm was located between Carnkitty and Roy's Hill, as they were less preferable for turbines due to the resulting increase in visibility to the east and the south. and in particular increasing visibility of turbines in the Spey Valley. So the position of Royce Hill and turbines within it were accepted as part of the Paul's Hill design considerations, that it would not be good to locate turbines on them. So that was previously acknowledged, the importance of Royce Hill. So why do you think the importance of Royce Hill is now being played down with these turbines now appearing on it?
Firstly, it doesn't say that some turbines on the adjoining land wouldn't be good. What it says would there would be greater visibility from some parts of the Spey Valley and Upper Knockando, and that's correct. They sought to locate those turbines at that time so that they did not give rise to those effects. It doesn't mean that by giving rise to those effects there's some automatic problem with the location of turbines there. It's still a case of what effect do they actually have and what degree of visibility do they have. And the design iteration has, as we discussed earlier, sought to minimise those environmental effects, notwithstanding that there are some visual effects on some local parts of the landscape in close proximity to Paul's Hill 2, particularly in that localised landscape around Upper Knockando on a short section of the B Road. I acknowledge that, and the LVIA acknowledges that, and it's acknowledged what the effects of that are. And indeed, the majority of those effects are not significant in EIA terms.
But coming back to Royce Hill, at the time of designing Paul's Hill 1, it was accepted that it would be better to avoid the more sensitive locations which are described there, and it would be fair to say that the landscape hasn't changed in the intervening period.
No, it hasn't, and the impacts of the Paul's Hill 2 turbines in terms of the extension need to be judged on their merits in terms of the impact that they have. The location of those turbines, the number of turbines and the impact they have has formed part of the process of arriving at where we are now, and it will have those limited localised effects which the LVIA says it has, and I don't defer from that. But they are limited and they are localised, and the extent of those views, in my view, is particularly tightly drawn, considering that we're talking about an extension to a wind farm of turbines of the sizes that we are.
Just coming back again to Royce Hill, I think it's acknowledged when you're extending wind farms that they should respect the existing focal points within the landscape. That's the guidance. And given that you now appear to be playing down the importance of Royce Hill and the role that it plays, where it was clearly acknowledged in relation to Paul's Hill 1, what respect do you think has been shown to Royce Hill as a landmark hill, as it's defined within the Council's Landscape Capacity Study, which is a material consideration?
Well, the location of the turbines has been carefully designed, and the turbines have been carefully related to Paul's Hill. For a start, particular standoff distances from the upper slopes of Paul's Hill have been kept free of turbines. That's particularly so that the prominence that Royce Hill does have in the local landscape would be maintained. The turbines are not on its upper slopes, they don't appear close to its summit, and they have been designed to respect it, and that's set out quite clearly in the design iteration process. I think there's no turbine closer than a kilometre to the summit of Royce Hill. It allows Royce Hill, insofar as it does feature as a landmark hill in the local landscape, to continue to do so.
Would you accept that most of the proposed turbines would actually sit higher than the top of Royce Hill itself, most notably Turbine 6, which even at its reduced height rises about 79 metres above the summit of Royce Hill? That's the figures.
Yes, I know the difference between base height and tip height of the various turbines, and I've considered that in reviewing the environmental information. The important thing is what is the effect of the relationship of Royce Hill to those turbines. I think the design iteration has set out not only appropriate parameters for assessing how those turbines relate to Royce Hill, but has achieved an appropriate design such that I don't think that the localised prominence of Royce Hill is harmed to any significant degree by this extension. It isn't a matter of no turbine can sit anywhere in the landscape that would have a blade tip higher than Royce Hill. The key question is what effect does that have? And I think the effect has been understood by those who designed this wind farm, and they designed it appropriately.
Obviously, the Council's witness and other witnesses before the inquiry have a different view in terms of that impact. So it does come down to the perception that people have in relation to Roy's Hill, its role, and how this scheme has been designed. And people have reached a different view from yourself on the impact of that and the significant effects that they feel are unacceptable.
I don't make any judgments on acceptability or unacceptability, because I can't do that out with the planning balance. What I can do is set out what the environmental effects are in landscape and visual terms, and I've done that. But if others jump to the conclusion that for example, a significant effect or significant visual effect from a particular viewpoint in relation to Roy's Hill equates to the unacceptability of the proposal, well, that isn't really for me to comment on, because that's not really an appropriate process.
I think there you said you hadn't made any judgment in relation to acceptability, but in the summary that you read out, you made the comment that you didn't think that any of the impacts of this led to effects that could be considered unacceptable. So you have made a judgment on acceptability.
To do that in relation to residential properties, because there is a different judgment there. If I was to decide that I thought any given turbine was overwhelming or overbearing on the residential amenity of that property, I would then have to decide that the scheme was unacceptable. I don't think those unacceptable effects have arisen.
I think, to be fair, in that summary, you're not just speaking about residential impact. You say that the turbines don't give rise to visual or character effects that could be considered unacceptable. So you are making a wider judgment there that you've just said you wouldn't be making.
Well, I don't make the planning balance, and I don't intend to make the planning balance.
Now come to the tricky subject of cumulative effects, which you've explained to us is very complex, so I probably have not understood all of it. But if you look at paragraph 317 of your inquiry report, you talk about a future baseline. And in considering that, you assume, for the purposes of the AI report and your inquiry report, decommissioning of Paul's Hill and Berryburn. It is possible that these could be repowered, and there's not necessarily an assumption that they will disappear from the landscape.
That's very true. And if you were just asking my personal opinion would be it's very likely that they would be. But I can't assume in carrying out the cumulative impact assessment that would be the case. I actually have to assume that they come out of the baseline, because that's the way it's done. Otherwise, I'd be making a speculative judgment, wouldn't I?
Although, having said it's probably more likely that they will be repowered, it is really a speculative judgment to say that they will be removed. I'm just wondering, what was the purpose of the future baseline exercise when there are so many unknowns?
Well, first of all, I did caveat what I said by saying a personal opinion. I'm not giving any professional opinion on the likelihood or otherwise of those schemes coming forward. That is for the future and for something that I don't know about. Now, the other part of your question is, why does one consider that? Well, in order to provide the best cumulative information that I can to the reporter, I need to cover all the bases, and that is not only knowing about what may come in to the baseline through new schemes being consented and constructed. I also have to consider whether something may go out of the baseline if there's a possibility of it doing so. And that's the reason for doing that. It's nearly another part of providing layers of relevant information for the decision maker.
If you look at paragraphs 318 through to 320 of your inquiry report, you say that the LVIA concluded that there would be no additional significant landscape effects with cumulative scenarios 2 and 3 over and above those for scenario 1. But the environmental statement, which I think is volume 2, page 630, it did already conclude that there were moderate, major and significant impacts already from this proposal. So,
yes, that's correct. What I'm saying is that significant effects have been identified, and with the cumulative baseline scenarios 1 and 2, those places that have that significant effect will continue to have it. We don't go into degrees of significance. We don't have very significant and very, very, very significant. We have significant effects. What that's really telling you is that where there are significant effects, there will continue to be significant effects with the cumulative scenarios.
But it would be fair to say that with cumulative scenarios, there's likely to be an intensification of those across this landscape type, the broad farmed valley landscape type. If there's already a significant impact, if you add in further turbines, you're likely to intensify that impact.
So what you're really inviting me to do is to get into that degrees of significance. The way that it is done and the appropriate way to do, which is what the EIA regulations require, is to identify where effects are significant. So if you already have a significant effect on a viewpoint and you add something to it, it will remain a significant effect. The decision maker will look at the assessment and the nature of what the addition is, and they'll be able to understand what that addition is, which is why, particularly in cumulative assessment, the first part of the assessment is to look at what the additional effect of the extension is on its baseline, so that that can be understood. So you do know what the additional effect is, but it still remains that it's still a significant effect. It doesn't become a significant plus. That doesn't exist within the remit of cumulative impact assessment.
I think I'd like it to. Would that be possible? If we just look at the Moray Wind Energy Landscape Capacity Study, paragraph 4.8 of your inquiry report, you make reference to the fact that this is just strategic guidance, it's not a policy document, and you describe it as an inappropriate tool with which to determine whether or not development is likely to be acceptable. Do you accept that it is, however, one of a number of documents that require to be taken into consideration, and indeed it's been adopted as a material consideration for the Council to look at and other parties?
Yes, I do accept that, and I think I've made that clear in my statement as well. What I'm saying in my statement is it's not a document which gives you tests that you have to pass, and if you don't pass those tests, you don't get your permission. It's an advisory guidance document which sets out a whole range of different parameters. But it doesn't take away from a scheme needing to be judged on its merits.
Absolutely. But having been relatively dismissive of the benefit of the guidance, you then want to take quite a lot of comfort from the fact that the proposal lies partly within a potential search area. You seem to take quite a comfort from that.
I don't agree with the first point in which you portrayed what I'd said. My view on the guidance is that the reason why I said what I said in my statement is that it is guidance, but when I read what Moray had said about that guidance, it's clear that they saw the document as prescriptive, in which things had to be passed, it had to be in accordance with, had to adhere to what it said. And I was saying, no, it shouldn't be read in that way. It is guidance, and guidance that needs to be taken consideration of, and indeed you'll see that the design iteration in the LVIA assessment, in the ES assessment, has taken into account that guidance. But what I'm saying is it's not a prescriptive document, and it shouldn't be used in the way that the Council appeared to do, which was saying it sets out a series of tests, you haven't passed those tests, therefore you don't pass go.
I think when you are weighing up the use of that guidance and all the other supplementary documents and policies that need to be taken into consideration, there does seem to have been quite a bit of comfort taken from the developer and yourself that this proposal lies within a potential search area, an area with scope for investigating further potential. But do you accept that that's not a carte blanche? If it's within a search area, there are lots of other caveats and lots of other issues that require to be looked at?
That's interesting, because you're now saying the scheme needs to be looked at on its merits. Yes, I do take some comfort from the guidance. and I've expressed that in my statement. The reason being is what it actually does, and what it does properly, and what it should do, is it sets out relative sensitivity within the landscape to accommodate turbines of different sizes. Where it judges that there are relatively few places within Moray that have the capacity for extensions of larger topography turbines up to 150 metres, this extension lies in one of those areas. And therefore, in the terms of the appropriate place where the council even themselves consider the potential lies for 150 turbines and the limitations of those locations within Moray, they've identified that this is one of the places where it ought to be able to be accommodated. That's the purpose of the document. So in relative sensitivity terms, we're in the part of the landscape which has the best prospect of accommodating a large wind farm extension. The council has identified it as such.
It's identified it as an area with scope for further investigations, which means that all other policies and guidance need to be taken into consideration, yeah?
Yes, but it's still one of the few locations within Moray in which even that potential exists, because outside of this identified area, the council has, through this guidance, already ruled out the potential in those other locations. So if there is to be the deployment of larger topography turbines and extensions within Moray, it's going to be in these areas. If these areas can't accommodate it, then Murray's basically said Murray's closed for extensions and turbines. There can be none.
But clearly Murray hasn't said that at all. And I think you made a comment there that it was interesting that I said the scheme had to be considered on its merits. That's the role of a planning authority, is to consider each scheme on its merits. Would you accept that the report that was presented to committee by the relevant planning officer was a balanced report which set out all of the issues that had to be taken into consideration? Clearly a different view was reached from what your clients were hoping for and from your own judgment, but the scheme was considered on its merits in terms of national guidance policy and the supplementary guidance.
I think that's probably a question for Mr. Bell, but within the remit of my own evidence, I did see within that the council was using the capacity study in a much more prescriptive way than I think is correct, and I don't think it should be used in that prescriptive way. It is an exercise in judging relative sensitivity within the landscape for the accommodation of turbines, and in doing that, it has come to the decision that this is a location which has the potential for that accommodation. And again, I think it's really important to consider that because relatively few parts of the landscape within Moray have been identified as that potential, then to come along and then say, well, really the guidance doesn't mean here, would seem to undermine your own guidance.
I don't have any further questions, thank you.
Thank you. I think if we take a short break for, say, 10 minutes before Mr. Campbell gets on. So we come back at, well, we might as well, no, we'll come back at 5:02. Thank you. Mr. Trinick got through that rather quicker than we anticipated. I'll just hand over to you, Mr. Trinick.
Thanks, sir. With your permission, and if Mr. Campbell's happy, if I just take you through the points, then we get things back in the right order rather than going astray. And what I want to do now is to put you all the points I was going to put to you on these this exercise. And let's just rehearse the exercise. First of all, we have produced Mr. Bonzio's, produced by Dr. Guff, some photomontages we're familiar with, the first series, which are Mr. Bonzio's document 1 to 20, I think I've got it right. We know where they are anyway. Then you produced a report, which is somewhere, APP 3, thank you, which is your response to those photomontages, APP3. Then Mr. Bonzio responded partly through an email from John Campbell, dated 26th of August of 1453, and that response had in its notes from Mr. Bonzio notes numbered 1 onwards. You then, I think, produced a response to that response. It goes on a bit, but there we are, which was submitted as Appendix APP 6. And in that response, you quoted those notes. So we don't have to look at the email. We can look at your response to get what Mr. Bonzio said about your first response. Correct
yes,
so far?
That's correct.
We now have some further further series from Mr. Bonzio. As far as I can tell, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, the differences between those and what came earlier are not in the sense of any new viewpoints or photomontages. They're in the sense that there are some captions, and sort of commentary rather, I think is the right word, on some of on the second and third of each series. I'm looking at Mr. Bonzio, make sure I'm correct so far.
That is correct.
Excellent. And 1 or 2 notations on the map, such as there's a red oblong on one of the maps. Otherwise, we're looking at the same material as before.
Yes, that's right.
Right. My first question to you is this. Why does all this matter? Or does it matter? And if so, why?
Well, it does matter. I think it matters quite a lot. The reason why, over many years, the production of visual material for wind farms has been honed and honed again and honed on top of that hone is an attempt over many years to make the representation of wind farms as accurate and as useful as it can be to provide reliable and accurate information for decision makers. And SNH has done a lot of work over the years in order to achieve it. We have guidance which allows us to go through a process which will not only provide reliable visualizations, which is also a process which is verifiable, such that if anyone wants to verify what you have done, they can do so because of the nature of the process. And I think it's exceedingly important that if it is an important decision is being made in relation to a wind farm, that decision is made on the basis of reliable and verifiable information.
We'll come back to that. Let's now go into Mr. Bonzio's new series. If we look at the second page, this is the view from the top of Penrose, equals a viewpoint 1A. And I want you to look at the second and third in the series of that viewpoint, where there is a commentary. And the first of them, or the second in the series, the first I want to refer to, bottom right it says, do you see Appendix 2 written? And he says, well, look, in the applicant's wireframe overlay, the proposed Paul's Hill 2 red turbines are set beyond what appears to be another hill, 5.75 kilometres away from the summit of Roy's Hill. So it's in the wrong place. We then go on to the next page, where it says, in this wireframe overlay, applicants corrected Appendix 2 by setting Paul's Hill 2 on Roy's Hill. What did Appendix 2 do? What was the exercise involved?
To be fair to Mr. Bonzio, when my team, my specialist team, took the coordinates of the location of Mr. Bonzio's photographs, applied our wind farm model with the coordinates of the turbines and the landfall mapping, we couldn't make an appropriate match, hence the first one we discussed being in the wrong place. I know they're wrong. That's part of the problem. What we then sought to do, to be fair to Bonzio, was to seek to adjust the image so that we could see whether, if Mr. Bonzio from a slightly different location or slightly different elevation, could we make it match, could we make it work on his behalf? And we sought to do that. We couldn't appropriately do that, but we were able to make a much better match than we were with the original coordinate.
You've gone far too fast. I wanted to stick with Appendix 2. On Appendix 2, as I understand it, from what you've told me, you took Mr. Bonzio's declared coordinates and you overlaid, based on those coordinates, the Paul's Hill 2 and other turbines.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct. We took the wind farm model for Paul's Hill and Paul's Hill 2 and we overlaid it on Mr. Bonzio's photographs from the coordinates that he had
From
given.
the coordinates he had provided.
Yes.
Right. As you've just described, you had difficulties with that. They ended up in different places,
Yes, it clearly...
but not necessarily the right places according to the LVIA.
Yes.
They ended up in yet another place.
Yes.
Yet another place. Fine. You then, as the Appendix 3 exercise, if you turn over the page, you said, fine, let's enter our coordinates for the wind turbines and see where they end up. Am I wrong or right there?
Not quite right, because
Right.
What we then sought to do was to move the position laterally and or horizontally, and we did a number of iterations of that. The one you see before you is the best iteration we were able to come up with. But we looked at a number of iterations of maybe if Mr. Bonzier was a slightly different elevation on a slightly different location, on, for example, on Roy's Hill, or its coordinates not quite right, can we make it come right? And we did our best to make a better match than that in scenario 2.
Still using his coordinates?
No, now shifting the position of the viewer, and shifting either the elevation or the location horizontally to try to get an appropriate match.
Right, so whereas Appendix 2 was simply using his coordinates as described, Appendix 3 was saying, well, that's not right, but so let's try and make it more like the positions look as they should be, the best fit you could get.
Yes.
But not using your, using the software that you use. Yes? Using the wind farm software that you use, but not going the whole hog and redoing the exercise as you would have done.
Oh, no, not at all.
No.
We couldn't, because that would involve using the original photography, the original data, not Mr. Bonzier's data.
Yeah. So you aren't claiming that Appendix 2 is correct. In fact, you're saying that's the problem. It's not correct. Are you saying that Appendix 3 images are in the correct location?
No, none of them are correct.
None of them are correct, no. The exercise wasn't to correct it. It was simply to do your best you could with Mr. Bonzier's images. And
Trying to be as fair as I can, and I didn't want to be just dismissive and say,
No.
you've got the wrong coordinate, your image is wrong. If I could find that actually the photograph was taken from 25 metres to the left and it all matched up, well, that would have been fine, and I'd have notified Mr. Bonzier coordinates were correct, but we'd sorted it. That wasn't the case.
thank you. So where does the reporter find correct visual information for the purposes of this inquiry?
In the LVIA.
Thank you.
Well, yes.
And
It's all.
you sorry, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Visually, and no doubt helps us all if he does so, but is the answer that the correct location is in the environmental statement or the additional environmental information?
Well, they're both correct.
Sorry, Mr. Campbell, I started again too soon. You spoke about verification. Have you ever been through an exercise of verifying photomontage images produced using the software that you use and doing them the way you do them, or your team does them, after the event in the field against actual turbines?
Yes, I have. I've done it on a number of occasions as a test, which was quite interesting thing to do. And indeed, I even did a verification process in this regard, because as part of this process, we took the model that we used to overlay on Mr. Bonzier's turbines and overlaid them on the visualizations in the LVIA as another check and balance. It's always good to have checks and balances to see how it's working.
Coming back to my question, you've used photomontages produced according to your methodology, and you've compared them in the field with turbines as built. What was the result of that exercise?
Well, I can give you an example of that exercise. Earlier this year, the Kirby Moor wind farm extension inquiry required the LVIA to undertake an assessment against a baseline of no turbines, notwithstanding the fact that there were turbines in the landscape. And just as part of that exercise, we had to do the reverse, which was montage the turbines back out of the landscape so there were none in it. And we took the opportunity to see whether the model for those turbines fitted back in with the photographs of the actual turbines in the landscape. So that was that exact exercise. And it proved that the Rusoff wind farm model was correct.
That Appendix 3 page again, the same page. I'm going to try pronouncing it and I'll get it wrong. The applicants also removed can't give us somehow, and the background hills towards the Murrayfirth coast and beyond, and replaced by a sand-coloured overlay. This presents a distorted version of our photograph, which the applicant is using as the baseline for Appendixes 2 and 3. Your comment on that?
Well, again, that's part of the problem of trying to match the landform model to Mr. Bonzio's photograph, because the landform model then sat below that horizon, so we've taken that out. That is not to say that what we've done is correct. It's just another example of the fact that it doesn't actually work, and we couldn't make it work.
Figure 2A, so off the next page, and then one more to get to the second in the series. Mr. Bonzi says the foreground topography of the applicant's computer-generated wireframe overlay is very different from our baseline photograph where there are no significant depressions. What is your comment on that?
Well, that really shows you that there is a problem inherent in the photography such that the landform data, which is accurate landform data, doesn't match the photograph. Now, part of the reason why in guidance the way that we stitch photographs, take photographs, is done to, as far as is humanly possible, eliminate any distortion or problems within the photography. There are a whole series of processes you can go through which can start to get distortion within the photography. If that occurs, then the landform map and the photography won't match.
One further point, and that takes us to figure 2A, sorry, I got the wrong one, 3A, which is the viewpoint 100 metres west of Ashestone on the B9102. You go to the second in that series, and then the comment you're about to comment on across the rest of the series, and you can go there. In the wireframe overlay Appendix 2, the wireframe overlay does not match our baseline photograph. This mistake has been corrected in the wireframe overlay in Appendix 3. I won't need you, just give me your comment on that.
Well, first of all, it's not a mistake. All we're trying to do is to in a subjective way, in an objective way, to match the landform data to the coordinates of Mr. Bonzio's photograph. Where they don't match, as I said earlier, we've sought to try to make that. We've not corrected our mistake. We've tried then to go on to a second stage, which to say, can we correct the problem that seems to be inherent in this visualization? So that's the more place, not correcting our own mistake, but in a way trying to correct as best as we're able an inherent problem that obviously lies within the visual material.
To be clear, therefore, you would not claim that the Appendix 3 images are correct?
No, I couldn't possibly do so, because in order for me to know they were correct, I'd have to have so many other parameters of information which is not possible to have from Mr. Bonzio's information. For example, I'd have to know exactly what angle each of the photographs was taken from within the LVA. We take those on a 22-degree sweep using a special device which gives the camera a 22-degree sweep. That enables you to eliminate any distortion in the stitch. Our software does the stitching with minimum overlap between the images to limit distortion. It's a full-frame camera with a 50mm lens, so we don't have to have a 50mm equivalent enlargement of the photographs, which eliminates...
Go a bit slowly for Mr. Campbell's and the reporter's sake. Say again that last bit.
We use a full-frame camera with a 50mm lens because that eliminates the process of needing to try to create a photograph, as Mr. Bonzio's done with a 35mm lens, which is not full-frame, and then make a 50mm full-frame equivalent enlargement of that, in which there's another potential for there to be a potential error. Each time you do that, you run the risk of building small but inevitably important problems into the process without knowing how exactly all of those processes are done. I couldn't verify it anyway. Part of the reason for the best practice guidance is to allow it not only to minimise the potential for inaccuracies, but to allow those finished images to be verified. I can't do that with this data, but I can't make it work either.
I don't normally ask an open question to my witness, but we haven't had a lot of preparation time. Is there anything you want to add to what you said?
No, I think the only thing is to say, absolutely wholly critical of Mr. Bonzio, and a lot of work has gone in using a theodolite and a whole series of mathematical processes and all sorts of things to create these images. I think the thing that is clear is that the reason why best practice guidance doesn't ask you to do it in the way that Mr. Bonzio has done it is that doesn't lead to an adequate result, clearly.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Campbell, I'll hand over to you.
That the representation of a proposed wind farm can only be achieved using full-frame cameras and the expensive editing equipment that you have outlined to us in the last few answers.
Got my microphone on. I actually say where it doesn't follow best practice guidance. I then go on to say that this does not necessarily mean they are inaccurate, because yes, there may be means of preparing accurate visualizations without using guidance. It's not what we're asked to do, it's not really what we should do, because it doesn't enable it to be verifiable for a start. But I acknowledge that.
At best, the photomontage is simply a tool for the decision maker, isn't it, to make a first-pass assessment of either landscape or visual impact.
It is a tool for the decision maker and indeed for the assessor in the environmental assessment, but it's an important tool, and the degree to which your assessment is reliable and can be considered to be at least correct within the parameters of your judgments, the more reliable that visual information is, the better your assessment will be, or the better able a decision maker is to come to a reliable judgment. So I think it is important, despite being a tool to assessment, it's important that it's a reliable tool.
Well, I hear what you say. Particularly important, is it not, in close-up views or where you're looking at proximity to residences?
Well, actually, the more difficult thing in...
No, I didn't ask you what was more difficult.
Well, I'm going to answer your question by reference to this, because you said it's more important in close-up views. It's more important in distant views. The more distant the view, the less reliable the visualization can be.
Isn't that self-evident?
Yes, exactly. So in close-up views, they tend to be much more accurate. That's where the highest degree of accuracy is usually achieved.
What I'd like to do in asking a few questions is to look at, first of all, Mr. Bonzio's inquiry report. If you could have that in front of you. We've referred throughout to Mr. Bonzio. It's important to understand that this is a joint effort and it's a report by both Mr. and Mrs. Bonzio. So no offence is intended. You got that in front of you?
I have. I'm just conscious that we're both having our microphones on at the same time. Do we need to switch between or... Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to first of all better understand your advice to the inquiry about cumulative landscape and visual assessment. One of the criticisms aimed at you is that you always put Paul Hill in the centre, and you said that's because that is what this inquiry is about, essentially. Is it relevant in your evidence? Do you say it is relevant that those who perceive themselves to be impacted by actual and prospective proposals should look at them all together as a piece?
Well, I certainly see that, local residents who may feel that a number of wind farms are coming forward, and if all of them were approved, they would feel that would make them uncomfortable or it would be objectionable to them. Clearly, they want the information to understand what may be happening in the landscape around them through a series of processes, a series of planning applications, and possibly public inquiries. Yes, of course. But in fact, the ES provides all of that information.
I wasn't suggesting it didn't. I just want to understand whether in your view, we should be looking, sorry, no pun intended, we should be looking at the contribution of Paul's Hill 2 to the cumulative effect of these three proposals, or whether we should be looking at the cumulative effect of the three proposals, of which Paul's Hill 2 is one component.
What we should be looking at is the additional effect of Paul's Hill 2 over the baseline of constructed, under construction wind farms. Secondly, that baseline, and including consented, because that's the most, basically for anyone else who's listening who doesn't fully understand cumulative impact assessment. First of all, cumulative impact assessment looks at that which is most likely to happen, or the thing that's most likely to happen is a baseline of constructed and consented schemes with the possibility that Paul's Hill may be approved and come into that baseline.
Yeah, but the guidance is quite clear. Sorry, may I just interrupt you?
Yes.
The guidance is quite clear. We look at constructed wind turbines, those before us in an application, and those that are somewhere else in planning. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I was just about to explain that. The second scenario that you're asked to look at through guidance is existing baseline plus those that are in planning, because there is the possibility and maybe even the likelihood that some of those will come into that baseline and be constructed. And then the
Is looking at the contribution of Paul's Hill 2 to the cumulative impact any different in reality from looking at Paul's Hill 2 as an individual proposal? So you're quite comfortable, are you, that there's enough information, or there was enough information in front of the author of the environmental statement to carry that exercise out? And you're quite comfortable that there's enough information, are you? Yes, thank you. If you would look at Mr. Bonzio's inquiry report on page 5, at paragraph 3.3, he sets out what he calls theoretical cumulative turbine visibility. As far as you are concerned, can I have one as well?
I've done something terribly wrong there.
Yes. As far as you're concerned, are the numbers correct there?
Well, Paul's Hill 2 actually has one turbine at 135. Cashgower, that's the worst case scenario for Cashgower. It actually has a scenario B, which
Yes.
also needs to take into consideration, because of course that scenario B could be approved and scenario A may not. So that's another possibility. And I think there are some differences in height in Rothes, but that's a worst case for Rothes. Notwithstanding that, the AI information takes into account the worst case cumulative scenario in association with Paul's Hill for Cashgower and Rothes.
I'm sure you've read this inquiry report carefully before
Yes,
coming
I did.
today. Looking at the description at 3.2, what he calls the baseline, are you generally content with that description?
Well, I'm not fully content with it. I don't want to split hairs. The property is set on the northern slopes of the protected Moray landmark. It sounds as though there's some sort of landscape protection designation.
Well, let's just take the word protected out, shall
yes,
we?
you take the word protected. It lies on the slopes of the landmark hill known as Royce Hill. That's correct.
Otherwise, do you take exception to any part of that description?
it the Spey Valley AGLV, and it's a local landscape designation.
Well, it's just a matter of fact, isn't
Yes, yeah. I don't think there's anything there which cuts across anything that I've been saying.
Thank you, that's helped me. Turning the page to page 6, but just reading from the bottom of page 5, if I may read that with you. Sensitivity of occupiers of core glass is high to the introduction of new and combined use of very large-scale turbines of maximum height, and so on. And then the second full paragraph. In 2001, in its environmental constraints for Paul's Hill, Natural Power mapped the detrimental visual impact of turbines further to the east and delineated a visual exclusion area. If you could turn up the Bonzio's document number 3, so that you can see that, please. It's at tab 3, should be in tab 3 in the folder you have.
Yes, I've got that in front of me now.
The first page of the extract is the cover sheet of the NTS for Paul's Hill 1. The second page is an extract from that document. And at paragraph numbered NTS 9, the author has written, in the second sentence, the guiding principles for this stage were to design a layout that appeared balanced when viewed from key viewpoints from which turbines would be seen, avoidance of archaeological sites, and avoidance of ecologically more sensitive areas, etc., etc. Map 2 at the end of this document identifies more sensitive areas within the site that provided constraints to the positioning of wind farm elements. And then map 3 is the extract from the NTS. You can see the broad blue vertical line on the map.
Yes.
What's changed since 2001?
Well, I think the thing that you're misinterpreting what's being done here is when they set out these design parameters and constraints, they're not sort of some constraint for all time. That were the design constraints they set themselves in the course of the design iteration of designing that wind farm at that time.
Mm-hmm.
That is not to say that any of the judgments they've made about saying, well, this part of the landscape may be more visible from here than this part of the landscape, so at that time we're comfortable to stay out of that part. That is not a prescriptive, one cannot develop within that area. They're merely saying that within the design parameters they set themselves for various reasons at that time, they've the criteria that they designed to.
We can agree, I'm sure, that the landscape hasn't changed.
Well, the landscape has changed because it's got Paulsville 1 wind farm in it, whereas it didn't have Paulsville 1 wind farm in it at the time.
But the
so, for example, the sensitivity of the landscape at the time was more sensitive to wind farms than it is now, for example.
The landscape to the east of the blue line hasn't changed.
The physical form of the landscape hasn't changed. The baseline of the landscape has changed because the baseline landscape has now got a wind farm in it.
And in the legend on that map, it's called a visual exclusion area.
Yeah, that's a parameter they've set themselves in their own design iteration exercise.
Yep.
That's
but
not
for perfectly good reasons, including reasons of visibility and impact on the landscape.
They chose at that time to restrict visibility in that area. That was a design parameter they set themselves.
So can we agree then that the only change, the only material change, has been the introduction of Paulsville 1 on the plateau?
Well, it's a fairly substantial material change that we've gone from a landscape that didn't have a wind farm to a landscape that has a wind farm. Right. And again, the fact that one design for a wind farm at one particular time sets itself certain design criteria does not restrict or inhibit future design criteria being set for an extension, for example.
Nor does it restrict or inhibit those who live there from looking back to see what was done 20 years ago, or nearly 20 years ago, see if parameters have changed. And that's what the Bonzios have done. It's a legitimate exercise, isn't it?
I don't doubt that for local residents, seeing what happened before and thinking about what may happen in the future are perfectly legitimate things for them to do. I'm trying to look at things in a much more objective manner because I don't live here. I don't live in Corglass. My role here is to have as an objective a view as I can and give that objective a view in my professional terms to the reporter, and that's what I'm doing. But I fully understand the position of Mrs. Mandel and Mr. Bonzio and the responses they have.
When you say I fully understand it and I have sympathy with it, which is something you repeated during your examination in chief 5 or 6 times, what are we supposed to take from that? Are you saying that you recognise that this proposal is coming to the edge of what might not be acceptable further down the valley? Otherwise you wouldn't say I have sympathy. You'd say, well, I endorse it, or I'm happy about it, or I'm joyful about it.
No, that would be foolish of me and certainly wouldn't be what I was saying. I understand why a local resident who currently has some views from their property that doesn't include wind turbines would not wish to see, or in most cases would not wish to see turbines in that view. And what I'm saying is I understand that position. My position as a professional landscape architect and witness is first of all to identify what the level of effects are on visual amenity and then make that judgment on residential amenity as we discussed earlier. That's a different process in which I have to disengage myself from what the views of Mr. and Mrs. Bonzio or Mrs. Mandel may be in terms of their personal responses to turbines near their properties and just try to be objective about it.
I understand very well, and I have enough experience to know that it's a 2-stage process, which you clearly explained earlier on. Would you look, so that we don't spend any more time than we have to on these issues of detail, would you look at page 9 of this inquiry report, at paragraph 310, the authors submit there that the magnitude of change and overall combined cumulative magnitude of change from the baseline at Corglass is major, with significant long-term detrimental impacts. Now, leave aside the word detrimental because clearly that's not part of your vocabulary, at least not on this occasion. Do you agree with that conclusion, with that classification of the impact?
No, what I would fall back on would be the impact assessments in the LVIA or the impact of Paul's Hill on Corglass and on the cumulative impact assessments set out both in the LVIA and the additional information.
All right, well, I think we won't agree to differ, but we clearly differ on that. And there has been a major change at Corglass, hasn't there, in the last little while, with the felling of the tree belt, which was adjacent to the drive.
Yes, I've seen that. I've been to Corglass both with the trees in place and with the trees not in place.
Indeed. Has that made any difference, in your view?
In fact, and the reporter was on the site view only the other day with myself and Mr. Bonzio. From the majority of the locations in which we looked, where there was the most direct views towards the turbines, actually the felling of the trees hadn't actually made any difference to those views. For example, from the holiday let property, the felling of the trees has made no difference to that view, so everything within the LVIA stands in that regard anyway. And from the LVI viewpoint in the car park arrival, it hasn't made any difference because the deciduous vegetation and the pines along the boundary that hasn't been felled still lie between the viewer and the viewpoint. But it has changed the kind of feeling and the perception of Corglass and taken away some of the intimacy of the area around the barbecue and fly fishing area. Yes, it has.
And it's also made a difference to the approach to Corglass, hasn't it?
It has, yes.
It's pretty central to your overall assessment, isn't it, that the importance of Roy's Hill is downplayed. Murray Council have described it as a landmark hill in their local plan and so on, and in their guidance. Are you saying it's not really a landmark? Or are you saying Murray Council are just wrong and they've mistakenly given it an importance it doesn't deserve?
I accept that within the adopted SPG, it's identified as a landmark hill. It's been all the criteria relating to it in the capacity study and the appendices to the capacity study on landmark hills have been taken into account in the information. What I'm saying in my inquiry report is that when I came to review this landscape, I didn't see it having the qualities of a landmark hill as I understand landmark hills in general, and indeed qualities of some of the landmark hills in Murray, and that I thought the council in their evidence had overplayed the importance of Roy's Hill and the impact of the turbines upon it in the way that they had portrayed it.
It's very close to the B9102, isn't it?
Yes, it runs down towards the B9102, the foot of Roy's Hill, in effect, through the pastoral landscape on the lower slopes, joins that road.
May I just have a second? Can I take it then that you can't agree, I'm just trying to identify areas of difference between us, you can't agree with 4.2.13 in Mr. Bonzio's report?
Sorry, when you say I can't agree with it...
well, do you agree with it? Sorry, it's probably not put the question very well. Do you agree that there will be a significant landscape impact on Roy's Hill? A cumulative impact on Roy's Hill?
Well, there is a significant character effect, both emanating from Paul's Hill in terms of its impact on character and from the extension. And that's a significant effect on local landscape character, which Roy's Hill is a part of the character and a characteristic element of that local landscape, has been identified as a significant effect, yes.
In your lexicon of descriptive words, does extension have any importance? This wind farm is described as an extension. It's actually been separately proposed by a separate developer, but part of the same Fred Olsen group. Nevertheless, it's described throughout as an extension. So should it have a homogeneity with the existing Paul's Hill 1?
Well, the two need to work together appropriately, such that the landscape and visual effects, amongst other effects, and I'm only talking from landscape and visual, so forgive me if I don't keep including all other effects, but it needs to work well in terms of landscape and visual effects, such that the effects it has can be deemed to be acceptable.
Overall?
Overall, yes, within the planning balance.
And what does appropriate mean in that answer?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I don't make the planning balance, but I do know...
No, I'm not asking a planning balance question.
I realise
appropriate. That. Sorry, let me finish the question. What does appropriate mean in your lexicon when you answer that question?
Considering the visual relationship between the existing wind farm and the new. It means considering how they appear at various places in the landscape. It means ensuring through the design iteration process, can you make sure they appear as well as they can. It means eliminating during the design iteration process any effects which the design team may feel may harm the planning balance or lead to an unacceptable conclusion. And we all do know when there are effects which are too great, and we eliminate them as we go through the process. It means taking all of those things into account so that you end up with a scheme which is considered by those who have designed it to be appropriate before it passes into the planning system.
Why have you suggested that T1 may be safely deleted from the plan? It's not what an application is for. The application is for 7 turbines. Leave aside questions of viability because they're not for you. You seem hardly to give Paul's Hill 2 a ringing endorsement. You say at the end of your inquiry report that the removal of T1 would not be inappropriate, double negative. You're not coming down on one side or the other.
No, I can explain that. First of all, it was asked me earlier by the council about coming to this with an independent mind and an independent set of views and objectives, and I've done that. In the course of my work, and also seeing the relationship with Core Glass, because I did, and Mr. Bonzio was very kindly allowed me to visit Core Glass because I wanted to see for myself. I wasn't just going to take what the LVI had said about the impacts on Core Glass. So I went there to see for myself, and I recognised that if there was to be any any decision made by the reporter that he felt that I was wrong and the LBIA was wrong, and then indeed there was an unacceptable impact on living conditions, the thing that would be doing it would be turbine 1. I concluded that although I recognise there is a significant effect emanating from the turbines in terms of those views, and that's set out in the LBIA, the greater proportion of that effect is from turbine 1. My professional view is that it still does not reach that threshold that would take you into overwhelming overbearing, but nonetheless, I understood that that would be the turbine which Mr. Bonzo, I assumed, would be most concerned about in terms of the visual effect on his property, and I suggested that it may be appropriate to make that suggestion, that if the reporter were to consider that to make the scene acceptable, that turbine should be removed. My client was amenable to doing so, notwithstanding the fact that our evidence is that we think that it does meet the tests and is acceptable.
It's very much sitting on the fence, isn't it?
No, I'm just trying to be reasonable. I'm just trying to be very, very reasonable in my approach.
It must follow that if you consent to the deletion of turbine 1, that you believe it to be unacceptable. That's common sense.
No, I'm merely saying that I think it's acceptable, but I'm not so arrogant to realise, because it's happened to me on a number of occasions, and it always will to any witness, that somebody else comes to a different conclusion. It was my evidence that if someone were to come to a different conclusion to my evidence, the most likely way in which they might do it would be turbine 1.
I'm sorry, but I read your report as really acknowledging that it was more likely than not that turbine 1 would be unacceptable.
No.
And this was a way of getting out of an outright refusal, and simply
No.
asking the reporter to condition its removal.
No, my report clearly states that my professional opinion is that it's not overwhelming overbearing on the residential amenity.
In respect, if I can move on to think about photomontages for a minute. In respect to the series 1 to 20, overall, I think it's your position that because, in inverted commas, the wrong equipment has been used, no reliance can be placed on the photomontage method used to create numbers 1 to 20.
I think it's probably more pertinent to say that because I can't ascertain that they are correct, that there isn't the information available to me to verify that they are correct, and through the application of the wind farm model, which I believe to be correct, and I cannot make it match Mr. Bontier's visualizations. The only conclusion I can draw is there is something somewhere in the process that has caused them to distort in a way that makes them incorrect and unreliable.
Well, we'll hear about that later rather than take up time now. If I could take you to the sequence of new ones which Mr. Trinick took you through quickly. If I've understood you correctly, you looked at what was proposed or what was put in front of you by Mr. Bonzo and tried your best to match it to a wireframe.
Well, more than that. I took the coordinates of Mr. Bonzier's photo location point and applied the computer model to that to see what degree of correlation was.
Is it right then to look at Appendix 3 as a reworking, if you like, of Appendix 2?
Yes.
But not necessarily an accurate representation?
No, none of them, in my view, can be relied upon as being
No, I
accurate
just want to find out what
representations.
your position is about these. In relation to the second set of three, the summit of Carnegie-Char, the first one is a photograph and doesn't show the indentation in the landscape which we see in the wireframe. and this has puzzled us because by definition a photograph must be accurate. Is the wireframe faulty here, or is the application of the technology faulty, or what is wrong with it?
No. A wireframe takes digital mapping information, accurate digital mapping information,
Yeah.
but on a grid basis, and the computer interpolates a landform between all of that digital mapping information. It is correct within a wireframe that if you get a slight dip or a trough in the landscape, the wireframe doesn't pick that up. What it picks up is all the actual form of the whole and wider landscape.
It depends on the resolution of the wireframe, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
But what's puzzling us, and I don't intend to criticize you for this, but what's puzzling us is that the first of the sequence of three is a photograph, and it doesn't show any indentation in the landform. And that's from the photographer's eye, so it must be right.
The
What we see,
photograph is right.
yeah. Well,
Yes.
what do we see in appendices 2 and 3 then?
You see the inability to match the computer model to the photograph because clearly there is something that's happened either in the photograph or in the incorrect location of where the modelling has happened,
Right.
such that a digital model can't be matched to it.
And is the digital terrain data to a certain resolution? Sorry, that's not a good question. When digital terrain data is shown on a wireframe, can it be shown to different resolutions?
You can map down to very fine resolutions if you need to do so. For example, if you wanted a borrow pit to be present in a wireline, you can download data for that local situation at such a level of refinement that it will show the borrow pit.
Yeah.
If you're trying to match the distant skyline of the Cromdale Hills in order to be able, you don't need that same level of local resolution. But wirelines generally use 40-metre grid data for matching wind farms to landforms because that data is sufficient to allow landforms to be matched against the digital model.
Does that mean the data points are 40 metres apart?
In that modelling, yes.
Yeah.
And then for closer, more detailed one, we've come down to 10 metre, and then the model interpretates between 10 metre.
That's fine. Now, if I could turn, Mr. Denny, please, from Mr. Bonzo's inquiry report to your own. I'd just like to start at page 1, if I may. Why are there two heights of turbine shown in this proposal?
Because through the design iteration process, one turbine was clearly sitting up in a way which didn't sit comfortably with the remainder, and those designing the wind farm have chosen to set it down at a different height to gain that balance that we were talking about, which would be desirable.
Is that turbine 6?
That's turbine 6, which is 134.
Okay, sure.
There's a point I made earlier to the council, actually, in looking at the design of a wind farm. It isn't just a case of saying, well, I've got turbines at one height, so I'll match them with turbines at the same height. Because, of course, you may be setting them on a landform which is slightly higher or slightly lower than their compatriot turbines. And so the design process is slightly more complex than that.
It must follow from that answer that the turbine 6 is set higher than those around it.
Well, it doesn't necessarily follow that that's the case. What it basically means is that there was obviously some visual relationship which was considered not to be as good as it could be, and it was improved by the reduction of that turbine to 134. That's what it tells you.
Visual relationship with the other turbines or with the landscape?
It could be either or both.
You don't know?
Well, it's set out in the design iteration.
All right. moving on through the... So will you indicate to me when you want to take lunch? And I've got about half an hour, 45 minutes to go, but will you just indicate to me and I'll stop?
I was thinking that very second, I don't want to keep... I mean, if there's a logical point at which you could break, if there ever is, then I think we're better doing that because, you know, that's going to take us till kind of get on 2 o'clock, which is a bit late for lunch. So, I mean, how are you feeling, Mr. Denny?
I would be fine. I would be fine to roll through 45 minutes, but I'm not everybody else. So.
Mr. Denny's experienced, I think. And you're assuming that there's logic in cross-examination?
Of course.
I'm happy to pause now if you're inclined to do that.
Yeah, if there was any problems, then I think, yeah, if we break... I keep looking at that clock, but it's not exactly right. So I'm going to say it's 5... Well, we'll come back at 2 o'clock and we'll carry on. I think that's...
Thank you.
Thank you.